There are moments when the world goes quiet, and then it happens. A sharp tone in one ear, a sudden frequency in the silence, not loud enough to frighten everyone else, but strong enough to stop you in your tracks. Most people brush it off. Stress, fatigue, random noise, nothing more. But deep down, something in you has never believed that. Because when it happens, it does not feel empty. It feels charged, timed, personal, like something is trying to reach you through the veil of this world. And that is exactly the kind of truth certain men worked very hard to erase. Imagine firelight shaking across stone walls, ancient texts spread across a table, hands deciding what humanity would be allowed to know and what had to disappear. Not because it was false, because it was dangerous. Dangerous to any system built on keeping you spiritually dependent. This was hidden. There were teachings attributed to Jesus that did not center religion as an institution, but direct contact, direct knowing, direct resonance with the source beyond the false world. And within those teachings was a disturbing idea, that some souls would receive signals others could not hear, not because they were special in the way the world defines special, but because something in them was still awake enough to respond. So if that sound has followed you in strange moments, during prayer, grief, stillness, or inner crisis, this is not random. In this video, you are going to understand why that ringing may have nothing to do with coincidence and everything to do with who you really are. And if this has happened to you, leave the word signal in the comments. To understand why this sound follows some people and not others, you have to begin with a harder question. What, exactly, are you? Not your name, not your biography, not the identity you had to build just to survive in this world. Under all of that, what are you, really? The old Gnostic teachers gave an answer that would make modern people uncomfortable, because it did not treat all inner lives as equal in depth or capacity. They spoke of three kinds of human orientation, not to flatter one group and insult another, simply to describe what they observed. The first were those completely absorbed in the visible world. Matter is all they trust. Matter is all they seek. Their attention never moves beyond appetite, pressure, status, routine, survival. They can be intelligent. They can be successful. They can even appear moral. But inwardly, they remain sealed. Life for them is surface. What can be touched, counted, consumed, displayed. A signal from beyond the material field cannot reach them, because there is no inward stillness to receive it. The second were those who sense that something more exists, but only in flashes. Their awareness opens for a moment, then closes again. A quiet sunset moves them. A crisis softens them. A death, a birth, a dream, a song, a strange moment in the middle of the night, and suddenly they feel there is more to reality than what they were taught. But the opening does not hold. The world pulls them back. Obligation, fear, distraction, image, noise, their connection flickers. Then there is the third kind, the ones who feel the fracture from early on. The ones who can function in the world, but never fully merge with it. The ones who have spent years pretending not to notice what they notice. The ones who have often felt too inward, too perceptive, too spiritually tense for ordinary life. Not superior, just harder to fully sedate. These are the people the Gnostics described as carrying a living spark from beyond the architecture of this world, a trace of the original fullness, a memory that matter could not completely erase. That is why some people hear the signal and others do not. Not because the source chooses favorites in some childish sense, but because some inner chamber is still responsive, still open enough to resonate. And that may explain more of your life than you realize. Think back. How early did you start feeling that the world was somehow off? Not merely disappointing, not merely unfair, off. Like everyone around you accepted a script you could never quite believe in. You learned how to participate. You learned how to play your part. But underneath it, there was always friction. A quiet refusal, a subtle grief, a sense that something essential had been covered over. Many people call that alienation. Some call it anxiety. Some bury it so deeply they stop naming it at all. But in Gnostic language, that sensation has another interpretation. It is the pain of contact, the divine element in you pressing against a world built to keep it asleep. And this is where the ringing takes on a very different meaning. Because according to this framework, the highest source, what the Gnostics called the monad, does not operate the way institutional religion trained people to expect. It is not a distant ruler issuing commands through hierarchy. It is not a being that requires endless mediation, performance, or ritualized dependency. The monad is prior to the systems of this world, prior to the false authorities, prior even to the lower powers that shaped material existence. It is not loud. It is not theatrical. It is not interested in control. It radiates. It emanates. It communicates through direct resonance. Not always in words, not always in symbols, sometimes through shifts in perception, sometimes through sudden knowing, sometimes through a pressure, a pause, a stillness that cuts through mental noise, and for some people, through tone. That is the first deeper reveal. The ringing may not be the message itself. It may be the threshold event, not content, but contact, not explanation, but interruption, a disturbance in the field of ordinary perception. That would explain why it often appears in moments when your life is inwardly charged, not only during spiritual practices, but during crossroads, grief, exhaustion, transition, emotional stripping, nights when your defenses are low, and the world finally goes quiet enough for something subtler to reach you. It would also explain why the experience can feel strangely precise, almost targeted, not always pleasant, not always gentle, but specific, as if something is trying to get through layers that have become too dense for speech. Now widen the lens. In the Gnostic view, this material world is not the full expression of divine reality. It is a lowered realm, a distorted realm, a place shaped by separation, forgetfulness, imitation, and control. Not because matter itself is evil in some simplistic way, but because this level of reality is governed by powers that mistake themselves for ultimate authority. This is where the language of the demiurge enters. The demiurge is not just a mythic villain. It is a way of describing false supremacy, a power that builds systems, names itself final, and trains consciousness to identify with limitation. The demiurge says, "This is all there is. Stay inside the frame. Measure yourself by what can be owned, feared, displayed, or lost. Forget what exceeds the visible order." And what enforces that forgetting? The Gnostics used the word archons, rulers, interfering powers, structuring forces. You do not need to imagine cartoon demons floating around the room to understand the point. Think of archonic influence as everything in this world that profits from spiritual amnesia. Everything that keeps a soul reactive, fragmented, overstimulated, fearful, divided from its deeper center. Some of that operates socially, some psychologically, some energetically, some in ways language still struggles to capture, but the pattern is clear. When a person lives trapped in low states all the time, panic, rage, shame, constant comparison, emotional exhaustion, addictive distraction, their field becomes easier to govern, easier to steer, easier to keep externally defined. If you have spent years feeling drained by a world that rewards numbness and punishes depth, then you already know this pressure from the inside. You may not have had language for it, but you have felt what it costs to stay awake in a system that keeps asking you to go spiritually dull. This brings us to the second deeper reveal. The signal is not only a point of contact, it is a change in orientation. It pulls your attention away from the frequencies that keep you fragmented. It often comes when you are closest to abandoning something essential in yourself. Not always in dramatic moments. Sometimes in quiet compromise. Sometimes when you are about to betray your own knowing just to make life easier. That is why the tone often arrives at threshold moments, when confusion is thick, when a decision is close, or when your soul can no longer ignore the shape your life has taken. It interrupts the trance. It breaks the momentum of unconscious living, and once you recognize that, you stop resisting it and start listening. And that sharpening matters. People who feel this most deeply are often the same people who were taught to distrust their own sensitivity. Over time, that becomes a wound, not just losing contact with truth, but losing trust in the part of yourself that recognizes it. And after enough years of that, many people stop rejecting their own depth out loud and start doing it silently, from the inside. So let's make this even more concrete. There are at least 3 ways this signal can present in a person's life, and each one carries a different texture. And once you recognize these patterns, the experience starts changing. What once felt random begins to reveal structure. What once felt irritating begins to feel strangely intelligent. The first is the interrupting tone, sudden, sharp, brief, often one-sided. It comes out of nowhere and cuts through everything for a few seconds. This kind of tone often appears when your attention needs to be broken away from the trance of whatever has captured it. A thought spiral, a fear loop, a false move, or sometimes an important inner realization just beginning to rise before the mind talks over it. When this happens, do something simple. Pause. Do not chase the sound. Do not fight it. Just pause and ask, what was happening in me at the exact moment this arrived? Over time, patterns emerge. You may begin to notice that the interrupting tone appears around specific people, specific choices, specific environments, or specific inner states. It starts to behave less like noise and more like punctuation. The second is the companion tone. This one is softer, steadier, more continuous. It tends to arise during prayer, meditation, solitude, tears, deep fatigue, or those rare moments when your inner life becomes honest enough to stop performing. It does not feel like an alarm. It feels like accompaniment, as if something has drawn near and is holding the channel open. This kind of tone is less dramatic and more intimate. It does not force attention, it rewards it. If you remain still, the louder layers of mind begin to separate from something quieter underneath. Not always words, sometimes clarity, direction, relief, a sense of being inwardly reassembled. The third is the pressure signal. Not exactly ringing, more like fullness in the ears, tension around the brow, pressure at the crown, or a subtle sense that your head is adjusting to something. This often comes before major internal shifts. A truth you can no longer deny. A relationship you can no longer remain inside. A stage of life ending. A false identity collapsing. A burst of grief finally moving. A sudden enlargement of perception. In ordinary language, people often reduce these moments to stress. But not all pressure is collapse. Some pressure is expansion. Some pressure is what you feel when the old inner structure can no longer contain what is trying to awaken through you. Now here is the third, deeper reveal. The signal becomes clearer as your life becomes more honest. Not more perfect, more honest. This is where people go wrong. They imagine spiritual contact depends on becoming flawless, pure, impressive, untouched by pain. But the deeper pattern is often the opposite, because the monad does not need your image. It responds to what is real in you, and reality in you may have been buried under years of adaptation. So if you want to work with this more consciously, begin there. When the sound comes, do not instantly assign meaning. First, become available. Take one breath, drop your shoulders. Place your attention in the center of your chest for a moment. Not because there is magic in the gesture itself, but because it helps gather scattered awareness. Then notice, do I feel contracted or open? Agitated or clear? False or honest? Am I moving towards something that deepens me or back into something that diminishes me? This is how the signal becomes relational. It is no longer just something happening to you. It becomes something you learn from. And once that relationship begins, another layer often opens. People start noticing that the ringing is not the only sign. Synchronicities increase. Dreams sharpen. Conversations land with eerie precision. A sentence appears at the exact hour it is needed. A person falls away. A door opens. An old pattern suddenly feels unbearable. Tears come without obvious cause, but beneath them is relief. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means the numbness starts breaking, and that can feel both beautiful and destabilizing. Because the more a person remembers their origin inwardly, the less they can continue betraying what they know. Old compromises begin to feel expensive. Familiar routines begin to feel spiritually costly. This is why awakening can feel disruptive before it feels liberating. That is why some people hear the signal most strongly during periods of unraveling. Not because they are being abandoned, because they are being pulled into confrontation with what is no longer sustainable. And yes, resistance often follows, not only from the outside, from within. Suddenly the mind gets louder, more cynical, more dismissive, more eager to explain everything away. You may notice thoughts like, I am making this up. I am turning random sensations into meaning. I need to stop. I should go back to normal. None of this matters. Notice the timing of those thoughts. They often intensify right after a genuine moment of inward contact. That matters, because one of the oldest forms of interference is not dramatic attack. It is self-cancellation. It is the subtle return of the voice that says, do not trust what you felt. Reduce it. Minimize it. Leave the deeper door unopened. You do not have to fight that voice with grand declarations. Just refuse to hand it final authority. Return to observation. Return to the body. Return to the breath. Return to the moments that felt unmistakably real. This is the real turning point. The sound matters less than what it trains you to notice, and what becomes possible once you stop dismissing deeper contact. Because if the signal is real, then your sensitivity is not merely a burden. It may be one of the ways deeper contact has been trying to reach you all along, and that leads to the final reveal of this section. The deepest activation is not hearing the tone. It is recognizing what the tone is asking of you. Not worship, not dependency, not spiritual vanity, alignment. The signal calls you toward a state in which what is false loses its grip. A state in which you become less available to manipulation, less seduced by empty structures, less willing to betray your own inner knowing, just to remain acceptable. In Gnostic terms, this is the beginning of remembering the divine spark. In human terms, it is the beginning of living in a way that no longer abandons the deepest thing in you. So the next time it happens, do not rush past it. Let it stop you for a second. Feel where you are. Notice what is happening in your mind, in your chest, in your life. Ask yourself whether you are being called to pay attention, to become still, or to prepare for change. Because the more consciously you meet the signal, the more it stops feeling like a mystery imposed on you and starts feeling like a pattern you were always meant to learn. And maybe that is what has been unsettling you all along, not the sound itself. The possibility that it has been telling the truth about you for years, that you were never fully made for the sleep of this world. That something in you has remained in contact. That beneath all the confusion, adaptation, grief, and waiting, a deeper identity has been listening the whole time. Not perfectly, not constantly, but enough. Enough to hear, enough to remember, enough to begin. Maybe that is why this found you now. Not when your life was louder, not when you were fully distracted, not when you still had the strength to keep dismissing what you felt. Now, when something in you is tired of surface answers, when the noise of the world no longer explains the tension in your spirit, when even a sound in the silence can begin to feel like a memory trying to return. So when that tone comes again, do not meet it the way you used to. Do not shrink from it. Do not brush it aside. Be still for a moment and listen differently, because what unsettled you may have been calling you. What confused you may have been identifying you. And what you thought was only a strange interruption may have been one of the first signs that something in you was still responsive. Not everyone will understand why this matters, but the ones who have felt it will know exactly what this means. If this reached you at that level, comment, I remember. Keep it simple. Let it be your marker, a quiet sign that you felt the truth of this somewhere deeper than thought. And if this stirred something real in you, subscribe and stay connected to this channel. We are going further into the hidden teachings, the forgotten architecture of the soul, and the signs that reveal who can still hear beyond the noise of this world. You are not at the end of something. You are at the point where the signal stops sounding random and starts becoming a path.